We sold wireframes, and people were interested in the wireframes. And once we had committed law firms, we then went to investors and said, we already have people lined up that want a product.
All right, here we are. It's Sunday, nearing the presentation time at Startup Weekend Auckland 2019. I'm here with Flavio. Thank you, Flavio. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Thanks for having me. And good question. So I've been working in business-to-business development for the last 15 years, specifically working on B2B business development, so helping companies sell to other companies.
Right.
But in the last 7 years specifically, I worked in tech companies. So I had two of my own startups, one that miserably failed, one that was more successful and is still going 5 years down the track.
Nice.
And the last 7 years I worked in tech accelerators and incubators. So we have a few government-funded ones in New Zealand. And the mission really is to help people with crazy ideas that want to change the world, to really unpack what's in their head, put a concept together, a business model, help them validate it, and acquire customers. And
So method to the chaos that is starting a business.
Yep, it doesn't feel like there is sometimes, but there is a method to the chaos and there's a framework you can use.
Great. So let's dive into a little bit about that framework and how you help startups every day. Tell me about what that's like.
Good question. What is it like? So we have most startups, they're really good at developing products. Something that they're passionate about, something like a change they want to see in the world, but they don't know how to commercialize it. And I think this is sort of our job as people in the tech startup ecosystem, coaches, mentors, and there are lots of them in the investor community. And our job really is to help them, not our job, but our support is there to help them commercialize these projects. A lot of entrepreneurs, they have experience in a corporate world, and their business models in the corporate world is very much exploiting what already works, whereas in a startup world, it's exploring what is going to work. And so you have this exploitation model versus an exploration model, and exploration is really going out, throwing a whole bunch of stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks. Whereas in a corporate, you already know what sticks and what you shouldn't do. And so it's managing that.
Gotcha. I'm just going to add a pause here because I just want to, for sanity's sake. You know when you lock the car, but you want to double check that you locked the car?
Yeah.
I just wanted to check if I was recording. And I'm recording, folks. We're good.
I always do that. It's like, did I leave my key in the car? Is the phone still on?
Is the phone still on? Yeah. Did I turn off the heater?
Well, that's it.
That's the one. Yeah. So no, we're good. We're still good. Okay, so let's go into a little bit about self-starters. Tell me about what that is.
Yeah. So the experience that I took away from these incubators and accelerators for the last few years has been that these accelerators are amazing. They have intakes twice a year. They get hundreds of applications and they pick a handful of companies. And what a lot of startups still lack, or the founders still lack, is the knowledge of how to go through these accelerators and what are the actual steps and some of the deliverables that they need to create in order to have a commercially viable business idea. So they have a product, but it's about customer acquisition. How do you go about it? It's about customer interviews. How do you actually do these customer interviews? Creating a letter of intent. It is how do you create a landing page? All these things that founders are not quite sure about. They come from a product perspective, but not from a marketing side. And Self-Starters, it started off as a blog. I was just sharing all the knowledge that I had over the last 7 years. And then people started asking for events. So we started having events, bringing in successful entrepreneurs that are not the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, but that are just a couple of years ahead of these entrepreneurs just starting their journey. And what we started learning at these events is that it was awesome to bring the community together, but a few of them reached out and they wanted more help. And this is when we started having coaching programs, mentoring programs, and where Self-Starters is at now, and this is the path for 2020, is really helping tech founders who are not quite sure how to acquire their first customers, to really simplify the offer, find customers, and become investment ready. And that's what we're all about.
Right. So it's helping founders who are probably looking at this, feeling a little bit overwhelmed, going, how do I even begin? Is it even possible to get a customer? And what's the right first step to take? And it's
Yep.
applying some sort of method to that.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
Okay. And obviously you would have worked with quite a lot of entrepreneurs over the years. What is kind of one key thing that you've taken away as, I guess, your most important thing that you'd like to pass on to other founders?
I'd like to pass on to the founders
Yeah.
is investor expectations.
Right.
I think I keep on coming to that. I find that, so we've done, one of the organizations, one of the accelerators that I was working with, they did an investor survey. And so they mapped out the investor ecosystem in New Zealand. Mm-hmm. We always hear about the US and in Europe how these 18, 19-year-old kids are raising millions of dollars on the back of an idea. Yeah. And we have all these entrepreneurs here in New Zealand that have the same expectation of this is how it will work. So they have an idea and now they need some funding to deliver the app or the software, the platform, in order to market it then. And what we found in our survey is that investors are very, very risk averse.
In New Zealand?
In New Zealand, specifically. And so what investors are looking for is a viable business model, something that works. And a way to prove that is through revenue and through customers. But the expectation from the entrepreneurs is that I need money to build the product to then get customers.
Yeah.
And so it's that whole chicken and egg thing, which comes first. You need customers to get investors, you need investment to get customers. And one of the biggest learnings or one of the biggest tips I can give to entrepreneurs is just to take ownership of the process. Mm-hmm. People always wait for investment or finding the right investors. You need to go out. You need to take your big project idea, chunk it down into smaller pieces, and find customers early on or someone who will give you money. And it's probably overstated a lot in the startup world. Go find customers, validate your market. But it is actually just as simple as taking ownership, going out, talking to people, getting someone to commit to some cash, finding 5 of those people, and funding your first initial prototype.
And I'm guessing it's really the right kind of feel-good rush that you want is like when a customer's like, actually I will pay for what you have, rather than like, oh, I'm an investor, here's lots of money. Right? It's that. Yep. It's the right kind of thing to be going for.
And I've got plenty of case studies. Like this is one of the startups that I founded, co-founded with Brad, the other founder. Sort of that textbook example of we had an idea, just going to be a Dropbox for lawyers. Invalidated, stuck with the market, changed it into a professional development platform for lawyers.
Right.
And we sold wireframes. And people were interested in the wireframes. And once we had committed law firms, we then went to investors and said, we already have people lined up that want a product. And we managed to get funding on the back of that, and investors on board, and we managed to get government grants on the back of that as well to help us then develop the solution.
Gotcha.
And so it's definitely possible. You just need to take ownership.
Ownership. I can definitely relate to what you speak of. I mean, I haven't lived in San Francisco, but I spent a short time there, and I was in a pizza store at 2 a.m. at night, and there was this like kid. He looked 18, and I was like, oh, what do you do? And he's like, oh, yeah, I'm a startup founder. I just got funding for a startup. It, fell to pieces, so I'm getting funding for another startup. And I'm like, what? What? So you're totally right. The realities are completely different, and but I'm starting to prefer doing things this way in terms of finding customers. It feels a lot better knowing you are actually about to solve a problem for someone. Yeah,
and like you say, it's finding real problems in market, and it's not building highly inflated. It's not creating the next WeWork stories.
Yeah,
but it's developing. Tangible solutions to real problems.
Right, cool. So let's talk about Startup Weekend and how you've applied that to here. So are you seeing similar things happen in Startup Weekend as to what you've seen in the long term working with entrepreneurs?
Yes. But so when we work with entrepreneurs over like a 6 month time frame or 9 month time frame,
Yeah.
we're essentially doing the same at Startup Weekend in 54 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the experience you have with team dynamics, with frustrations, with conflict, with managing expectations, that usually happens over months,
Yeah.
is now happening in the space of 2.5 days.
Right.
And so you have, you see the whole journey, and you get a speed exposure to that.
Right. Gotcha. And how many of these have you done so far? These startup weekends?
To be honest, not as many as other people here.
Right.
Someone yesterday, I think Paulie has done 30.
Wow.
30 startups across the world. There's another mentor here. She's done every single one that's been in New Zealand or in Auckland, 15 of them. And I partook in one 5 years ago as a participant, and this is my first one as part of the crew.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Right. So you are a mentor, right? When they say crew, that means a mentor in Startup Weekend.
Yep.
Right.
So both. So we have mentors,
Yeah.
and we have crew which help put together the event.
Gotcha.
There's a lot of hustle and bustle that goes into it beforehand,
Right.
and making this happen, and finding the space, the food, logistics, the mentors, reaching out, funding. Yes, a lot of it.
Which is how you reached out to me, and
Voila.
which is why I'm here. So
That's it.
I'm cool. Awesome. Any other key takeaways that you'd like to talk to?
If you are curious about Startup Weekend and you're not quite sure how to get into it, or actually you're curious about entrepreneurship and you just want to get a taster for it, amazing opportunity. I did it 5 years ago. I think it was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest takeaway that I got was, one, the methodology applied rather than textbook. Like everyone always has heard about Lean Startup and has applied Lean Startup in one way or form, but once you actually get to do it with other people, it's very different. You build that tacit knowledge base. The other thing is the network. So if I reflect back on the Startup Weekend that I did 5 years ago, there are probably 10 entrepreneurs that are sort of moving and shaking things now in the tech industry that were part of that cohort.
Right.
And you meet them personally, and you get to meet them at the beginning of their journey, which is amazing to see down the track. So
Definitely.
I highly recommend anyone who's keen to get a taster for the tech industry, the entrepreneurship industry, to partake.
Well, I mean, that's how we met. We met at a hackathon
Exactly.
as mentors, and here we are. So definitely the networking part is amazing,
Yep.
and following people's journeys.
And it's people come together around the passion, like they're passionate about entrepreneurship, passionate about making a change in the world, and it's amazing to see, like when people align around the passion,
Yeah.
the community that's around it, it's so strong, and it's doesn't matter where you go, you can always carry that with you.
Definitely. So, I guess one thing that I'd love to just take away from you, from your self-starters world, is you talked about customer validation and user interviews. Now, that's something I personally struggle with. What's one tool or framework that you use to approach that? And I'm really asking this for selfish reasons, because I'd love to learn how you do it.
So which part?
Basically, talking to a customer, like face-to-face, a potential customer, and figuring out their pain points, but not leading them on.
Yep.
You know, what's your kind of go-to approach with that?
You probably hit something there quite well, which is they're not leading on.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest mistakes I see entrepreneurs make is selling their product. Like I'm a trained salesperson,
Right.
so I naturally try and sell my prototype.
Yeah.
And if you pitch it enough, people will just buy it anyway. So it's the non-leading questions. And there's a book actually out there. It's called Mum Test.
Okay.
And there's a guy who wrote a book on, if you create a question to your customer in a way where they can't lie, sort of like with your mum, right?
Yeah.
If you ask your mum, hey mum, what do you think of this? She'll be like, oh, this is amazing, son, it's great,
Yeah.
really awesome, we'd love to spend some more time with you, etc.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, if you can formulate the question where they can't lie to you,
Right.
no one wants to tell you that your idea is bad. That's sort of a good question. What I like to do is, and sort of my jam is the B2B space. I like to map out processes. So ultimately in B2B, it's around hacking a process, making something easier, faster, the communication, handling it better. But it's mapping out the problem that you've identified, mapping out the process beforehand
Right.
and after. And asking people to think back at a time where they had this particular problem. Not putting them into a hypothetical point where they're going, have you ever experienced this? No. Would you, if you ever experienced, do this? That's a bad question.
I see. Okay.
Because you're asking a hypothetical scenario. Yeah. So first of all, you need to speak with people who have actually had this issue or this problem.
Right.
And you want to ask them what they did beforehand and what they did after. One of the tools that we use at Self-Starters is like the 5W and H framework.
Okay.
And so I ultimately have like an A4 piece of paper, and it has 6 boxes.
Yeah.
And so you have what's happening, where is it happening, who's part of it, why is it happening, how is it happening, when is it happening. And if you just ask questions and you just poke at, like just pulling out the information from them, and all you're doing is asking them these 6 questions, you can map out the context of the situation.
Right.
And it gives you a much better understanding of what actually is happening, why this problem arises, and you can then take that as ammunition for when you're building a prototype.
And this is centered around, like, say, something that they're trying to do. Like, so I am a mother and I am trying to, you know, I don't know, what a job of a mother, right? Like,
yep.
I'm not a mother, so I'm not able to speak to this. Maybe that's a bad example, but
so maybe someone like creating a podcast, right?
Yeah. Okay. That's
bam.
Oh, boom. Okay. All right. Yeah. Well.
Yeah. So creating a podcast.
Yeah.
And so if you're validating an idea, in your case, maybe, you know, if you're finding other startup weekends, how would you, like, what are you looking to test? What are you looking to validate? If you map it out on a business model canvas, like you're looking at your business model as a whole, you're looking at who is your customer, what's their problem, how can you acquire them, the money, the revenue, the cost structure, like all these are validation questions. And you would want to pick which one of these you need to validate.
Yeah.
So are you looking at whether people are willing to pay for it? Are you looking at whether people actually have a need for it? Are you looking at whether people like the idea of a podcast in the first place?
Yeah.
Like, which part are you actually looking at?
Right.
And depending on what you're looking to validate, you would list your assumptions and turn these assumptions into questions that then give you the what's happening, when is it happening, why is it happening, the context.
Interesting. Okay. Sounds
Hope that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'll check that out. 5 Ws.
Come if you want to learn more about it. I've got this is a bit of a plug for Self-Starters now.
Plug away.
But I write a weekly tips and tricks for market validation, customer acquisition.
Cool.
Check it out, selfstarters.co.nz.
Okay.
And have a look. I think I've written about 50 essays now.
Wow.
And one of them bound to answer your question.
Great. Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much, Flavio. I think, what's the time now? It's...
Time to go.
Time to go.
Time for pitches.
Time for pitches.
Time for
All
pitches.
right. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me. It's been awesome.
Likewise.
And tune into the next pop-up podcast.
Boom. Cue music. That's the music. Lean.